Marcus Williams had always been the class clown. At 23, he still carried that same mischievous grin that had gotten him into trouble throughout school. His friends called him Mark the Spark because he could light up any room with his jokes and pranks. But Marcus had a problem that he didn't like to admit: he often went too far without thinking about the consequences. On that crisp Tuesday morning in London, Marcus was walking through the city centre with his girlfriend Sarah and their mutual friend Jake. They were tourists from a small town in Ohio, visiting England for the first time. Everything seemed magical to them: the old buildings, the red buses, the accents they heard everywhere. Marcus had his phone out, recording videos to send back home to his family. "Look at this place," Sarah said, spinning around with her arms stretched wide. "It's like we're in a movie." Marcus grinned and pointed his phone at her. "And you're the star, babe." He was always trying to make her laugh, always looking for the next funny moment to capture. That's just who he was, someone who lived for the entertainment of others. As they walked down the busy street, Jake suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. "Dude, look over there. Are those the guards everyone talks about?" Marcus followed Jake's gaze and saw them, two royal guards standing perfectly still outside a government building. They wore their traditional red uniforms with the tall black hats, and they looked like statues. Marcus had heard about these guards before, how they never moved or reacted to anything. His eyes lit up with an idea that would soon change everything. "Oh man, this is perfect," Marcus whispered, pulling out his phone. "I've seen videos of people trying to make these guys laugh. They never break character." Sarah looked nervous. "Marcus, maybe we should just take a normal picture and move on." But Marcus was already walking toward a nearby coffee shop. His mind was racing with possibilities. He had seen countless videos online of tourists trying to get reactions from the royal guards. Some people would tell jokes, others would do silly dances, but Marcus wanted to do something that would really get attention online. He wanted to create a video that would go viral, something his friends back home would talk about for years. The coffee shop was busy, filled with the morning rush of office workers and tourists. Marcus ordered 3 large coffees, but his mind wasn't really on the drinks. He was thinking about the guards, about how funny it would be to see one of them try to stay serious while something unexpected happened. In his mind, it would just be a harmless prank, something that would make everyone laugh. "What are you planning?" Sarah asked as they left the coffee shop with their drinks. "Just a little fun," Marcus said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Trust me, it'll be hilarious." As they walked back toward the guards, Marcus started recording with his phone. He had done this kind of thing before: pranks on his friends, funny videos for social media. But he had never done anything in a foreign country, especially not involving people who were working in such a serious job. The first guard stood completely motionless, staring straight ahead. Marcus approached slowly, talking to his phone like he was hosting a TV show. "Okay, folks, we're here in London, and we're about to see if we can get a reaction from one of these famous guards." Jake was laughing behind him, encouraging him to go through with it. "Do it, man. This is going to be epic." Marcus felt the familiar rush of excitement he always got before a big prank. He lived for these moments when everyone was watching, when he could be the center of attention and make people laugh. Back home, his pranks had made him popular. Teachers might have scolded him, but his classmates always thought he was the funniest guy around. He didn't think about the guard as a real person with feelings, a job, and responsibilities. In Marcus's mind, the guard was just a character, like someone in a movie or a video game. He didn't consider that this person had chosen to serve his country, that he took pride in his work, or that he had a family waiting for him at home. The guard's name was James Morrison, though Marcus would never know that. James had been serving as a royal guard for 3 years. He had joined the military because he believed in duty, honor, and protecting his country. Standing guard wasn't just a job for him, it was a sacred responsibility. He had trained for months to develop the discipline needed to remain perfectly still and alert, no matter what happened around him. James had seen many tourists over the years. Most were respectful, taking photos from a distance or simply admiring the tradition he represented. Some tried to make him laugh or react, but he had learned to tune out these distractions. His job was to protect the building behind him and to uphold centuries of military tradition. On this particular morning, James was thinking about his daughter Emma, who had just started school. She was proud of her father's job and often told her classmates about how brave and strong he was. James wore his uniform with pride, knowing that he was part of something bigger than himself. Marcus moved closer to the guard, still recording. "Let's see if we can get a smile out of this guy." He was speaking loudly, partly for the camera and partly because he was getting more excited about his plan. Several other tourists had stopped to watch, which only encouraged Marcus more. He loved having an audience, and he could already imagine how many likes and shares this video would get once he posted it online. "Watch this," Marcus said to his phone, holding up his cup of coffee. Sarah grabbed his arm one more time. "Marcus, please don't do anything stupid. These guards are working." But Marcus was already caught up in the moment. He had gone too far to back down now, especially with all these people watching. In his mind, he was just going to splash a little coffee, maybe on the guard's boots or something harmless. He thought it would be funny to see if the guard would finally react. What Marcus didn't understand was that the coffee in his cup was extremely hot. The barista had just made it, and steam was still rising from the surface. He also didn't realize how seriously these guards took their duty, or how his actions would be seen by the law. James noticed the young man approaching with the coffee cup, but he remained focused straight ahead. He had dealt with many attempts to distract him before. He was trained to ignore whatever happened around him, as long as it wasn't a real threat. But something about this tourist felt different. There was an energy about him that made James slightly more alert, though he didn't move a muscle. Marcus raised the coffee cup, grinning at his phone camera. "Here goes nothing, guys. This is going to be awesome." In that moment, several things happened that Marcus hadn't considered. A police officer who had been watching the area noticed the potential trouble. A security camera captured everything that was about to unfold. And James, despite his training to remain motionless, began to sense that something more serious than a typical tourist prank was about to happen. The other tourists who had been watching started to look uncomfortable. Some began to move away, sensing that this wasn't going to be the harmless fun that Marcus believed it would be. Jake, who had been encouraging Marcus, suddenly realized that his friend might be about to cross a serious line. "Hey man, maybe we should just..." But it was too late. Marcus had already committed to his plan. With his phone recording and a crowd watching, he felt like he had no choice but to follow through. He had built up the moment too much to back down now. Marcus pulled his arm back and threw the scalding hot coffee directly at James. The liquid hit the guard's face and chest, soaking into his uniform and causing immediate, intense pain. The coffee was so hot that James couldn't help but cry out and step backward, his hands instinctively moving to his face. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, James let out a sound of pain that cut through Marcus like a knife. It wasn't the reaction Marcus had expected at all. This wasn't funny, this was horrible. The realization of what he had done hit Marcus like a physical blow. The guard wasn't laughing or even angry in a normal way. He was hurt, really hurt. Steam was rising from his uniform, and his face was red where the coffee had hit him. Sarah screamed and dropped her own coffee cup. Other tourists began backing away quickly, some already pulling out their phones to call for help. The police officer who had been watching started running toward them. Marcus stood frozen, still holding his phone, which was still recording. His mouth fell open as he watched James struggling with the pain of the burns. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. In all his pranks before, no one had ever been seriously hurt. "Oh God," Marcus whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." James was trying to maintain his composure despite the pain, but the hot coffee had burned his face and neck. His eyes were watering, and he was struggling not to show how much it hurt. Even in this moment of agony, his training was telling him to stay strong, but the burns were too severe to ignore completely. Other guards who had been nearby came running to help their colleague. One immediately called for medical assistance while another started helping James remove his jacket to assess the damage to his skin. Marcus finally stopped recording, but it was far too late. The damage was done, and everything had been captured on video, not just by his phone, but by the security cameras and by several other tourists who had been recording the scene. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, grabbing Marcus's arm. "The police are coming." But Marcus couldn't move. He was staring at James, seeing for the first time that this wasn't just a character in a funny video. This was a real person who was now suffering because of Marcus's need to entertain people. The police officer reached them just as Marcus was starting to understand the true weight of what he had done. This wasn't going to be a funny story to tell back home. This was going to change everything. As the officer approached with a serious expression, Marcus felt his whole world beginning to crumble around him. The laughter had stopped, the cameras were still rolling, and a good man was hurt because Marcus had thought it would be funny to throw hot coffee at someone who was just doing his job. The tourist trip that was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime had just become the biggest mistake Marcus had ever made. And this was only the beginning of the consequences he would face. The police officer, Constable David Chen, had been patrolling this area for 5 years. He had seen many tourists do foolish things, but nothing quite like this. As he reached the scene, he could immediately see that this was no ordinary prank gone wrong. The Royal Guard was clearly in pain, medical personnel were being called, and the young American tourist looked like he was about to be sick. "Step back, please," Constable Chen said firmly to Marcus. "You need to come with me right now." Marcus's hands were shaking as he looked between the officer and James, who was now being attended to by a medic who had arrived quickly on the scene. The reality of what had happened was sinking in deeper with every passing second. This wasn't a prank anymore, this was assault on a member of the Royal Guard. "I didn't mean to hurt him," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. I thought it would be funny." Sarah was crying now, holding onto Jake's arm as they watched their friend's life fall apart in real time. She had known Marcus for 3 years, and she had seen him do some crazy things, but never anything that actually hurt someone. She loved his playful spirit, but she had always worried that one day he would go too far. "Sir, I need you to put your phone away and place your hands behind your back," Constable Chen said. His voice was professional but firm. This was a serious incident, and he had to treat it as such. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus felt like he was in a nightmare. Just 20 minutes ago, he had been laughing with his friends, excited about exploring London. Now he was being arrested, and a good man was hurt because of his stupidity. The crowd that had gathered was much larger now. Some people were taking pictures and videos of Marcus being arrested. Others were trying to get a better look at James, who was being treated by the medical team. Marcus realized with horror that this was probably going to be all over social media within hours, but not in the way he had hoped. "Is he going to be okay?" Marcus asked the officer as they walked toward the police car. Constable Chen looked back at the guard, who was now sitting on a nearby bench while the medic examined his burns. "That depends on how severe the burns are. Coffee that hot can cause second-degree burns, especially on the face and neck." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Second-degree burns. He had done that to another human being because he wanted to make a funny video. The weight of his actions was crushing him. At the police station, Marcus was processed like any other criminal. His fingerprints were taken, his photo was captured, and he was put in a holding cell while they decided what charges to file. The cell was small and cold, with just a bench and a toilet. Marcus sat on the hard bench and put his head in his hands. For the first time in his life, Marcus was completely alone with the consequences of his actions. There were no friends around to laugh at his jokes, no audience to impress. There was just him and the horrible knowledge that he had seriously hurt someone. Meanwhile, at the hospital, James was being examined by doctors. The coffee had caused first and second-degree burns on his face, neck, and chest. The doctors cleaned the burns and applied special dressings, but James would need ongoing treatment and would definitely have scars. James's wife, Helen, arrived at the hospital as quickly as she could. She was a school teacher, and she had been in the middle of a lesson when she got the call that her husband had been injured. Her hands were shaking as she rushed through the hospital corridors, not knowing how serious his injuries were. "How is he?" she asked the doctor immediately. "The burns are serious, but he'll recover," the doctor explained gently. However, he'll need several weeks off work, and there may be permanent scarring, especially on his face. Helen sat down heavily in a chair beside James's bed. Her husband looked so different with the bandages covering parts of his face. James was a proud man who took great care of his appearance, especially in his uniform. These scars would be a constant reminder of what had happened to him. "Who did this?" Helen asked quietly. "A tourist," James said, his voice rough from the pain medication. "An American kid who thought it would be funny." Helen felt anger rising in her chest. Someone had hurt her husband for entertainment. Someone had damaged the face she loved, the man who worked so hard to provide for their family and serve his country, just to make a stupid video. Back at the police station, Sarah and Jake were trying to figure out what to do. They had been told they couldn't see Marcus yet, and they didn't know how serious the charges against him would be. They sat in the waiting area, both feeling helpless and scared. "I can't believe he actually did it," Sarah said for the 10th time. "I tried to stop him." Jake nodded. "I know. I should have tried harder too. I was encouraging him at first, before I realized how bad this could get." They had called Marcus's parents in Ohio, but it was early morning there, and they hadn't answered yet. Sarah dreaded that conversation. Marcus's parents were good people who had always been proud of their son's humor and personality. How could she explain that their boy was in jail in London for assaulting a royal guard? The news media had already picked up the story. Videos of the incident were spreading across social media platforms, and news websites were starting to report on the American tourist coffee attack. Marcus's face was becoming known around the world, but for all the wrong reasons. Detective Inspector Sarah Williams, no relation to Marcus, was assigned to handle the case. She had seen many cases involving tourists who got into trouble, but this one was particularly serious because it involved a royal guard and had been captured on video. Inspector Williams interviewed Marcus that afternoon. He was no longer the confident young man who had been making videos just hours before. He looked exhausted and scared. "Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" Inspector Williams asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "I hurt someone. I really hurt someone who was just doing his job. The victim has suffered significant burns that will require ongoing medical treatment. He may have permanent scarring. Beyond that, you've assaulted a member of the Royal Guard, which carries serious legal penalties in this country." Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. Can I apologize to him? Can I do anything to make this right?" Inspector Williams studied the young man across from her. She had seen genuine remorse before, and she believed Marcus was truly sorry for what he had done. But being sorry didn't erase the consequences. "That's not how this works," she explained. "You'll be charged with assault causing bodily harm. Depending on the severity of the guard's injuries and his recovery, you could face additional charges. You're looking at significant jail time, and you'll likely be banned from entering the UK again." Marcus had never been in serious trouble with the law before. A few parking tickets, maybe a noise complaint from neighbors when his parties got too loud, but nothing like this. The idea of going to prison terrified him. "What about my girlfriend and friend? Are they in trouble too?" "They're not being charged with anything. They tried to stop you, according to witness statements. But they'll need to stay in the country until this is resolved if they want to support you through the legal process." That evening, Marcus was allowed one phone call. He chose to call his parents. His father answered on the second ring. "Dad?" Marcus's voice broke immediately. "Marcus? Where are you?" Sarah called and said something happened, but we couldn't understand what she was saying. "Dad, I messed up. I messed up really badly." Marcus tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded even worse when he said them out loud to his father. He could hear his mother crying in the background as his father relayed the information to her. "Son," his father said quietly, "tell me you didn't really throw hot coffee at someone." "I did, Dad. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." There was a long silence on the phone. Marcus's father was a construction worker who had raised his son to treat people with respect and to think before acting. This was completely against everything he had tried to teach Marcus. "We'll find a way to help you," his father finally said. "But, Marcus, you need to understand that this is going to change everything. Your whole future might be different now." After the phone call, Marcus lay on the narrow cot in his cell and stared at the ceiling. He thought about James, wondering how much pain he was in, whether he would be able to return to his job, whether his family was okay. Marcus had never seriously hurt another person before, and the guilt was overwhelming. He also thought about his own future. He had been planning to start a new job when he got back to Ohio. He had been saving money to propose to Sarah. He had dreams and plans that now seemed impossible. Criminal charges, especially international ones, would follow him for the rest of his life. But, mostly, he thought about the look of pain in James's eyes when the coffee hit him. That image was burned into Marcus's memory, and he knew it would haunt him forever. The next morning, Marcus was brought before a magistrate for his initial court appearance. Sarah and Jake were in the courtroom, along with several news reporters who had come to cover the case. Marcus was assigned a public defender since he couldn't afford to hire a lawyer for a case in the UK. The magistrate read the charges: assault causing bodily harm against James Morrison, a royal guard. Marcus was told that he would remain in custody until his trial, which could be several weeks away. As he was led back to his cell, Marcus saw Sarah crying in the courtroom. He wanted to tell her how sorry he was, not just for what he had done to James, but for ruining their trip, for putting her through this nightmare, for throwing away the future they had been planning together. James, meanwhile, was at home trying to rest, but the burns made it difficult to sleep. The doctors had told him he would need at least 3 weeks off work, possibly more. For someone whose job required him to be in perfect physical condition and to present himself impeccably in uniform, this was devastating. His daughter Emma, who was 7 years old, didn't fully understand what had happened to her father. She knew he was hurt and couldn't go to work, but Helen was trying to protect her from the details of the attack. "Why did the bad man hurt Daddy?" Emma asked one evening as Helen was helping her get ready for bed. Helen struggled with how to answer. How do you explain to a child that someone hurt their father for entertainment? How do you maintain a child's faith in the basic goodness of people when something like this happens? Sometimes people make very bad choices, Helen said carefully. The man who hurt Daddy wasn't thinking about how his actions would affect other people. Emma was quiet for a moment. "Will Daddy's face get better?" "The doctors are taking very good care of him," Helen said. "But he might always have some marks from where he was hurt." That night, after Emma was asleep, Helen sat beside James's bed and looked at the bandages covering her husband's face. She thought about the young American sitting in jail, and she surprised herself by feeling a mixture of anger and pity. She was furious that he had hurt James, but she also recognized that he was probably suffering too, in his own way. The story continued to spread across social media and news outlets. Videos of the attack and Marcus's arrest were being shared thousands of times. Comments ranged from outrage at Marcus's actions to discussions about tourist behavior and respect for other cultures. Marcus's friends and family back in Ohio were seeing these reports and struggling to reconcile the person they knew with the actions that had made international news. Marcus had always been the funny guy, the one who made everyone laugh at parties and family gatherings. But now his name was associated with a serious criminal act. In his cell, Marcus had plenty of time to think about how he had gotten to this point. He realized that his need to entertain others, to always be the center of attention, had blinded him to the basic humanity of the people around him. He had seen James as a prop in his performance rather than as a real person with feelings, responsibilities, and a life beyond what Marcus could see. The guilt was eating him alive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw James's face when the coffee hit him. He heard the sound of pain that James had made. He thought about James's family, about how they must be dealing with this situation because of his thoughtless actions. Marcus began writing letters, to James, to his own parents, to Sarah. He wrote apology after apology, trying to find words that could somehow express how sorry he was and how completely he understood that he had been wrong. But he knew that no words could undo what he had done or take away James's pain and scars. As his trial date approached, Marcus's lawyer explained that his best hope was to plead guilty and hope for leniency based on his remorse and his lack of prior criminal history. But, even with a lenient sentence, Marcus was looking at significant jail time and a criminal record that would affect the rest of his life. The consequences of 30 seconds of poor judgment were going to last forever, for both Marcus and James. And this was still just the beginning of how this moment would change both of their lives. 3 weeks had passed since the incident, and the trial was approaching quickly. Marcus had spent this time in a London jail, sharing a cell with various other prisoners. The experience had been terrifying and humbling for someone who had lived a relatively sheltered life in small-town Ohio. His cellmates included petty thieves, drug dealers, and men who had committed much more serious crimes. At first, some of them had mocked him for being the coffee thrower whose case had become famous online. But, as they got to know him, several realized that Marcus was genuinely devastated by what he had done. "You're not like us," said Tony, an older man who had been in and out of prison for years. "Most people here, they don't really care about their victims. But, you're eating yourself alive over this." Marcus had lost almost 20 pounds during his time in jail. He barely slept, barely ate, and spent most of his time writing letters that he wasn't sure he would ever send. The guilt was consuming him from the inside. Meanwhile, James was recovering slowly at home. The physical wounds were healing, but the emotional impact was proving to be even more challenging. For the first time in his 3 years as a Royal Guard, James was questioning whether he could continue in his role. The burns on his face had left visible scars, despite the excellent medical care he had received. Every time James looked in the mirror, he was reminded of that moment when his life changed forever. The confident, proud guardsman was struggling with feelings he had never experienced before. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," James told his wife Helen one morning. "Maybe I should have seen it coming, should have moved out of the way." Helen took his hand gently. "James, you were doing your job exactly as you were trained to do it. This wasn't your fault." But James couldn't shake the feeling that somehow he had failed. The attack had happened while he was on duty, protecting an important building. In his mind, he should have been able to prevent it, even though logically he knew there was nothing he could have done. The psychological impact was affecting every aspect of James's life. He had trouble sleeping, often waking up from nightmares about the attack. He found himself flinching when people approached him, even friends and family members. The easy confidence he had always carried was gone. Dr. Rebecca Foster, a trauma counselor, had been working with James to help him process what had happened. In their sessions, she helped him understand that his reactions were normal responses to an abnormal situation. "You've experienced a traumatic event," Dr. Foster explained during one of their sessions. "Your brain is trying to protect you from similar situations in the future, which is why you're having these reactions to people approaching you." "But I'm supposed to be strong," James said. "Royal Guards don't fall apart because someone threw coffee at them." "Being strong doesn't mean pretending that trauma doesn't affect you," Dr. Foster replied. "It means acknowledging what you're going through and working to overcome it." Emma, James's daughter, was also struggling with what had happened to her father. At school, some of the other children had seen news reports about the attack, and they asked her difficult questions that she couldn't answer. She had started having trouble concentrating in class and had become clingy when James tried to leave the house for medical appointments. "Daddy, do you have to go to the court thing?" Emma asked one evening as James was reading her a bedtime story. "Yes, sweetheart. I need to tell the judge what happened so they can decide what should happen to the man who hurt me." "Will he hurt you again?" James felt his heart break a little. His 7-year-old daughter was now afraid that people might hurt her father. The innocence that should have protected her from these adult concerns had been shattered by Marcus's actions. "No, Emma. He can't hurt me again. He's going to be punished for what he did, and then he'll have to go back to America." But, privately, James wasn't sure if that was enough. The physical scars would fade over time, but the damage to his sense of security and his family's peace of mind felt permanent. Sarah and Jake had remained in London to support Marcus through his trial, even though it meant missing work and spending money they didn't have. Sarah visited Marcus every day that she was allowed, and each visit was heartbreaking for both of them. "I don't even recognize you anymore," Sarah said during one visit, looking at Marcus through the thick glass that separated them. "You look like you've aged 10 years. Marcus knew she was right. The carefree young man who had stepped off the plane in London 3 weeks ago was gone. In his place was someone haunted by guilt and regret, someone who understood for the first time in his life that actions have real consequences for real people. "I keep thinking about his family," Marcus said. "I saw them talking to the medic, and I realized he probably has people who love him, people who were scared when they found out he was hurt. I did that to them." Sarah reached toward the glass, wishing she could hold his hand. "Maybe that understanding is worth something. Maybe it means you'll never do anything like this again." "But what does that matter to him? What does my understanding do for his scars or his family's fear? I can change and become a better person, but I can't undo what I did to him." Marcus's parents had flown to London to be present for the trial. His father, Robert Williams, was a man of few words who had worked construction for 30 years. His mother, Linda, was a nurse who had always believed in the goodness of people. Seeing their son in jail was the hardest thing they had ever experienced. "We raised him better than this," Linda said to her husband as they sat in their hotel room the night before the trial. "How did we fail him so completely?" Robert put his arm around his wife. "We didn't fail him, Linda. Marcus made his own choice. All we can do now is support him through whatever comes next." But both parents were struggling with feelings of guilt and shame. Their friends and neighbors back in Ohio had seen the news reports. Some had been supportive, but others had been judgmental, questioning how Marcus had been raised and what kind of family would produce someone who would do such a thing. The media attention had been intense and mostly negative. Marcus was being portrayed as the ugly American tourist, the entitled young man who thought other people existed for his entertainment. While some of this criticism was fair, his family felt that the coverage didn't show the remorse and devastation that Marcus was experiencing. James's family was also dealing with unwanted attention. Reporters had tried to contact them for interviews, and photographers had taken pictures of James leaving medical appointments. The family that had once lived a quiet, private life was now in the spotlight because of something that had been done to them. "I just want this to be over," Helen said to her sister during a phone call. "I want James to heal, I want Emma to feel safe again, and I want us to be able to move on with our lives." But moving on felt impossible when the trial was still ahead of them and when James was still struggling with his recovery. The night before the trial, Marcus couldn't sleep. He had been provided with a suit for his court appearance, and it hung in his cell like a reminder of the life he used to have. He thought about all the choices he had made that led to this moment, the decision to make the video, the decision to buy the coffee, the decision to throw it. Each choice had seemed small at the time, but together they had created a disaster that had changed multiple lives forever. Marcus understood now that there are some mistakes you can't take back, some moments you can't undo, some pain you can't heal. He had written dozens of letters to James, but he had never sent any of them. His lawyer had advised him that any contact with the victim could be seen as inappropriate, but Marcus desperately wanted James to know how sorry he was. He wanted to find some way to express that he understood the magnitude of what he had done. In one of the letters he would never send, Marcus had written, "I know that saying sorry isn't enough, and I know that nothing I say or do can take back what I did to you. But I want you to know that I think about you every day. I think about your pain and your family and how I changed your life for no good reason. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I will regret what I did to you for the rest of my life." James was also having trouble sleeping before the trial. He would have to face Marcus for the first time since the attack, and he wasn't sure how he would react. Part of him was angry, furious that his life had been disrupted by someone's need for entertainment. But another part of him felt sorry for the young man whose life was now ruined because of 30 seconds of incredibly poor judgment. "Do you want him to go to prison?" Helen asked her husband as they lay in bed the night before the trial. James was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he finally said. "I want him to understand what he did, and I want to make sure he never does anything like this to anyone else. But I don't know if prison accomplishes that. He's already lost so much. His freedom, his future, his reputation. Maybe he's learned his lesson already. But what about justice? What about the fact that I'll have these scars forever, that Emma is now afraid of people hurting me, that our whole family has been traumatized by this?" These were questions without easy answers. Justice meant different things to different people, and there was no simple way to balance Marcus's actions with appropriate consequences. The morning of the trial arrived gray and rainy, matching the mood of everyone involved. James put on his civilian clothes. He wouldn't be wearing his uniform to court, and tried to prepare himself mentally for what was ahead. Marcus was brought to the courthouse in handcuffs, surrounded by security guards. As they entered the building, he could see James and his family walking up the steps ahead of him. For a moment, Marcus caught sight of James's profile and could see the scars that were now a permanent part of his face. The guilt hit Marcus like a physical blow. Those scars were his fault. That family's pain was his responsibility. No matter what happened in court today, those facts would never change. Inside the courtroom, Marcus's family sat on one side while James's family sat on the other. The divide between them felt enormous, representing not just the physical space but the emotional chasm between the person who had caused harm and the person who had suffered it. Judge Patricia Hamilton had seen many cases during her 20 years on the bench, but she was particularly interested in this one. It involved questions of justice, rehabilitation, cultural sensitivity, and the consequences of social media culture. The decisions made today would affect not just Marcus and James, but would send a message about how society deals with actions that harm others for entertainment. As the proceedings began, Marcus found himself staring at James, trying to reconcile the confident guardsman he remembered with the scarred man sitting across the courtroom. The transformation was Marcus's fault, and that knowledge was almost unbearable. This trial wasn't just about determining Marcus's legal fate. It was about confronting the human cost of thoughtless actions, the lasting impact of momentary decisions, and the complex relationship between punishment and redemption. For both Marcus and James, this day would mark either the beginning of healing or the deepening of wounds that might never fully close. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Hamilton called the session to order. Marcus stood between his lawyer and a translator. Though he didn't need translation services, the formality of the British court system just demanded that everything be done precisely. His hands were shaking slightly as he faced the judge who would determine his fate. Marcus Williams, you are charged with assault causing bodily harm against James Morrison, a royal guard, on the morning of October 15th. How do you plead? Marcus's lawyer had advised him to plead guilty. There was video evidence, multiple witnesses, and no possible way to deny what had happened. More importantly, Marcus genuinely wanted to take responsibility for his actions. Guilty, Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. Judge Hamilton nodded and made a note. The court will now hear impact statements from the victim and, then, testimony regarding the defendant's character and circumstances before proceeding to sentencing. James stood up slowly and walked to the witness stand. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating for weeks. He had practiced what he wanted to say, but seeing Marcus in person again brought back all the emotions from that terrible day. Your Honor, James began, his voice steady despite the difficulty of the situation, I have served as a royal guard for 3 years. It has been my honor to protect important buildings and to represent the traditions of British military service. On the morning I was attacked, I was simply doing my job. Marcus listened intently, his eyes fixed on James. This was the first time he was hearing directly from the person he had hurt, and every word felt like another weight added to his conscience. The physical injuries I suffered included first- and second-degree burns on my face, neck, and chest. I have undergone multiple medical treatments and will require ongoing care. I will have permanent scarring, particularly on my face. James touched his cheek unconsciously as he spoke. But the physical injuries are not the worst part of what I've experienced. The attack has affected my ability to do my job, my relationship with my family, and my sense of security in the world. My 7-year-old daughter now fears that people might hurt me when I'm working. My wife has had to take time off work to help care for me. Our entire family has been traumatized by what Mr. Williams did for his entertainment. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. Hearing the full impact of his actions laid out so clearly was devastating. He had hurt not just James, but James's entire family. However, James continued, I want the court to know that I don't believe Mr. Williams intended to cause the level of harm that resulted. I think he was thoughtless and selfish, but I don't think he's evil. I've had time to think about this, and, while I can never excuse what he did, I recognize that he's a young man who made a terrible mistake. This unexpected compassion from his victim hit Marcus harder than anger would have. James was showing him a grace that Marcus didn't feel he deserved. I hope that whatever sentence the court imposes will help Mr. Williams understand the seriousness of his actions and ensure that he never does anything like this again. But I also hope that he'll have the opportunity to learn from this and become someone who contributes positively to society. When James finished his statement and returned to his seat, there was complete silence in the courtroom. His words had been powerful not because they were angry or vengeful, but because they showed such thoughtful consideration for everyone affected by the incident. Marcus's lawyer then called several character witnesses. His parents spoke about the son they had raised, describing a young man who had always been kind to others and who had never shown any signs of violence or cruelty. His former boss talked about Marcus as a reliable employee who was well liked by his colleagues. Sarah took the stand and spoke through tears about the Marcus she had fallen in love with, someone who made people laugh and who always tried to cheer people up when they were sad. She talked about how devastated he had been since the attack, how he had lost weight and couldn't sleep because of his guilt. "He's not the same person anymore," Sarah said. "What he did was wrong, and he knows that. But he's suffering terribly because of it. He's not someone who doesn't care about others, he cares too much now. He can barely function because of how much he regrets what he did." When it came time for Marcus to address the court himself, he stood up on shaking legs. This was his opportunity to speak directly to James, to the judge, and to everyone whose lives had been affected by his actions. "Your Honor, I want to say something to Mr. Morrison first, if I may." Judge Hamilton nodded, and Marcus turned to face James directly. "Mr. Morrison, I am so sorry for what I did to you. I know that saying sorry isn't enough, and I know that nothing I say can take back your pain or your scars or the fear I caused your family. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I treated you like you weren't a real person with feelings and a life and people who love you." Marcus's voice was breaking as he continued. "I've thought about you every day since it happened. I've thought about your pain and your family and how I changed your life forever for no good reason. I know you have every right to hate me, and I want you to know that I hate what I did too." He turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I can't undo what I did, but I want to dedicate my life to making sure that something positive comes from this terrible situation. I want to work with organizations that promote understanding between cultures and respect for people who serve their countries. I want to speak to other young people about the consequences of thoughtless actions." Marcus paused, gathering his thoughts. "I know I have to be punished for what I did. I accept that. But I hope that someday I can prove that I've learned from this and that I can become someone who helps others instead of hurting them." Judge Hamilton had listened carefully to everything that had been said. She had seen many cases involving young people who had made terrible mistakes, and she had to balance the need for justice with the possibility of redemption. "Mr. Williams," she began, "you have committed a serious crime. You assaulted a man who was serving his country, and you caused him significant physical and emotional harm. Your actions were recorded and broadcast around the world, bringing shame not only to yourself but to your country." Marcus nodded, accepting every word. "However, I have also heard testimony about your character prior to this incident, and I have observed your genuine remorse throughout these proceedings. Mr. Morrison's compassionate statement has also influenced my thinking about appropriate consequences." The judge paused, looking between Marcus and James. "I sentence you to 18 months in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 months if you complete anger management and cultural sensitivity programs. Additionally, you will be required to perform 500 hours of community service upon your release, and you will be banned from entering the United Kingdom for 10 years following your sentence." Marcus felt relief and disappointment at the same time. 18 months was less than the maximum sentence he could have received, but it still meant more than a year away from his family, his job, and his life. Furthermore, Judge Hamilton continued, "I am ordering that you write a formal letter of apology to Mr. Morrison, which will be delivered to him only if he chooses to receive it. This letter should not be a legal document or an attempt to reduce your culpability, but rather a sincere expression of your understanding of how your actions affected him and his family." As Marcus was led away to begin serving his sentence, he looked back at James one more time. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Marcus saw something in James's expression that he hadn't expected, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it someday. The months that followed were difficult for everyone involved. Marcus served his sentence in a British prison, where he participated in every program available to him. He completed anger management courses, cultural sensitivity training, and courses in conflict resolution. He read extensively about British history and military traditions, trying to understand the significance of what he had attacked. During his time in prison, Marcus received hundreds of letters from around the world. Some were hateful, calling him names and telling him he deserved much worse punishment. But others were from young people who said his story had made them think more carefully about their own actions and the potential consequences of thoughtless behavior. Marcus answered as many letters as he could, sharing his experience and encouraging others to learn from his mistake. Slowly, he began to see that perhaps some good could come from his terrible error in judgment. James returned to work after 3 months of recovery, though he was assigned to a different post initially while he rebuilt his confidence. The physical scars had healed as much as they ever would, but the emotional recovery took much longer. With Dr. Foster's help, James worked through his trauma and gradually regained his sense of security. Helen was amazed by her husband's strength and his ability to find compassion for Marcus even after everything he had been through. Emma adjusted better than her parents had expected. Children are often more resilient than adults, and, with her parents' support, she was able to understand that what had happened to her father was unusual and unlikely to happen again. The letter that Marcus wrote to James, as ordered by the court, was delivered 6 months after the trial. James wasn't sure if he wanted to read it, but Helen encouraged him to at least look at it. The letter was 5 pages long and filled with genuine remorse and understanding. Marcus had clearly spent a great deal of time thinking about the impact of his actions. He wrote about the programs he had completed in prison and about his plans to work with organizations promoting cultural understanding when he was released. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Marcus wrote, "and I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand then, that you are a real person with a real life and real feelings, not a character in some entertainment for me. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the compassion you showed me in court." James read the letter several times before deciding to keep it. He didn't respond to it, but he didn't throw it away either. It became a reminder of the complexity of human nature and the possibility of growth and change. Marcus was released after serving 14 months of his sentence, 2 months longer than the minimum due to some early disciplinary issues. When he returned to Ohio, he found that his life had changed dramatically. His story was still known, and many employers were reluctant to hire someone with his background. Sarah had waited for him, though their relationship had been strained by the distance and the circumstances. They worked together to rebuild their connection, but both acknowledged that they were different people than they had been before the incident. Marcus eventually found work with a nonprofit organization that promoted cultural exchange and understanding. He traveled to schools and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging people to think carefully about their actions and their impact on others. "I threw hot coffee at a stranger because I thought it would be funny," Marcus would tell audiences of young people. "I didn't think about his pain, his family, his life, or his humanity. I treated him like a prop in my entertainment, and I caused real harm to a good person who was just doing his job." The talks were always difficult for Marcus, requiring him to relive his worst moment over and over again. But he received feedback from teachers and parents saying that his presentations had impacted their students and children, making them think more carefully about their actions. 5 years after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It was from James. "Mr. Williams," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds you well. I have heard about the work you are doing to educate young people about the consequences of thoughtless actions, and I wanted you to know that I respect what you are trying to accomplish." Marcus's hands shook as he read the letter. "I will always carry the scars from what you did to me, both physical and emotional. But I have also seen how you have tried to turn your mistake into something meaningful. I believe that you have genuinely learned from what happened, and I hope that your story will prevent other people from making similar mistakes." The letter concluded, "I do not forgive you because I think forgiveness is something that cannot be demanded or expected. But I do not hate you either. I hope that you continue to grow from this experience and that you find peace with yourself. James Morrison. Marcus cried when he finished reading the letter. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something perhaps even more valuable, recognition that he had changed and that his efforts to make amends were meaningful. The incident that had lasted only 30 seconds continued to impact both men for the rest of their lives. For James, it was a reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of compassion even for those who wrong us. For Marcus, it became the defining moment that taught him about the weight of actions and the possibility of redemption through service to others. Neither man would ever be the same as they were before that terrible morning in London. But both found ways to grow from the experience, to become better than they had been, and to contribute something positive to a world that can be changed in an instant by thoughtless actions or by the conscious choice to do better. The story of the coffee attack became a cautionary tale told around the world, but it also became something more, a story about the complexity of justice, the possibility of growth, and the power of compassion to transform even the worst situations into opportunities for human understanding. Years later, when people asked Marcus what he had learned from his experience, he would always give the same answer: I learned that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying responsibilities you can't see, and deserving of respect simply because they are human. I learned that 30 seconds of thoughtlessness can change lives forever. And I learned that while you can't undo the harm you cause, you can dedicate your life to making sure something good comes from your worst mistakes. It was a lesson learned at a terrible price, but it was a lesson that Marcus carried with him every day as he worked to ensure that his story would help others avoid making the same devastating choice he had made.